Hello, welcome back to my channel and to my 3 monthly roundup of the best films I've been watching lately. Now, I'll be honest with you, it's not been a great 3 months for me for discovering new movies. I haven't really seen any belters. But I've seen a sort of mixed bag, a motley crew, if you will, of films that are interesting. They're not 5-star, maybe even 4-star movies, but they're of interest. And I've mixed it up with a couple of rediscoveries as well. Films, for example, like Baltimore. Now, this is a British-Irish co-production that came out a couple of years ago. And it's by Joe Lawler and Christine Malloy. I don't know if you've ever come across them. They're a husband and wife team. They mostly make films in Ireland. They started back in about 2006 with a film called Helen, which is about a girl who plays one of her school friends in a recreation of the day before her murder. And she finds herself taking on her personality of her friend. What I like about this team is they don't make great movies, right? But they're totally independent. They've sort of gone under the radar of most British cinema, and they've done their own thing, and they follow their own path and their own themes. And they show you a side to British filmmaking and Irish filmmaking, and a side to our society that is different than you find in most movies from these islands. You see a completely independent perspective. And this particular movie, Baltimore, is, I think, their best movie yet. It's based on a real event in the 1970s. A girl from a posh, aristocratic British family ended up taking part in an IRA raid on a country home in Ireland where there was a massive art collection. They ended up stealing a great deal of paintings in order to finance the IRA. And it's a recreation of what happened, and it does flashbacks to her life in England to try and explain how she came to be where she was. And it's surprisingly good. And the main role is played by Imogen Poots. What a fantastic name. And she's very good in it. And it's a very small scale, very cheap movie. But I think it's well acted, and it's well put together. And I like its independent sensibility. I like the fact that it shows the reality, the slight crappiness of this band of IRA members that she's part of. The gulf between what they want and what they dream about and who they really are, I think is really well explored. And it sort of took me by surprise. I found it a very engaging film. Another film that took me by surprise is a film that I'd heard about. People had been praising it, but I left it because I thought it was one of these kind of, crowd-pleasing film festival movies that people go, oh yes, very good, and then they forget about. It's by Paweł Pawlikowski, a Polish director who started his career in England, making films with Paddy Considine, which were not bad, actually. And then he went to Poland and he made a film called Ida, a black and white film about this nun, which got a lot of praise, but I thought was rather academic and rather sort of festival-y, so I ignored his work from then on. But I thought I'd go back and try this film, Cold War. And what it is, it's the story of a relationship between two Polish musicians, and one of them, the guy, defects to the West, and she stays behind the Iron Curtain. And it's a record both of the Cold War and their relationship through different vignettes through time. And a lot of the movie, it's in black and white, beautifully shot in black and white. A lot of the movie is music. And the development of music, the development of jazz, the development of the way in communist countries they started using folk music and putting it in concerts, that development of music becomes almost the development of 20th century history. It's a film that relies on music to tell a lot of its story, to supply a lot of its feeling and its intellectual, coherence, which is quite brave. And the music is brilliant. I'm not a great fan of folk music or jazz, but I found the film quite compelling. It's beautifully shot, it's very well acted. It's perhaps a bit cold. It doesn't dive into the feelings so much of the people. You're sort of watching from a distance. So it sometimes is a bit uninvolving. But I thought it was very brave, and I thought the handling of the music with the drama was beautifully done. There's one point where he's in a jazz concert and he kind of breaks down. And the guy, the pianist, the composer of the score, had to come up with a jazz score, where a guy clearly seems to lose it and goes off and improvising in a crazy way and then comes back. and he does it. It's very effective. It's very convincing. That's brilliant filmmaking and brilliant composing. It's very impressive. So it's a bit of a cold movie, a bit of a brittle movie, but impressive in parts. It's worth trying. Now, a couple of rediscoveries that I went back to, but I hadn't seen them for so long, it was like seeing them fresh, you know. The first one is Gabay. This was one of the first Iranian films I ever watched, and it's by the director Mohsen Makhmalbaf, who was a very important figure, probably the most important figure in Iranian cinema in the late 80s, early 90s, and then he got eclipsed by Kiarostami. In the mid-90s, he started what Arrow Films, who collected them together in a package called his Poetic Trilogy. And the first of these was Gabay. And Gabay, as I understand it, was almost half started as a sort of something for the government. It was a portrayal of these nomadic peoples in Iran. And a gabay is a ornamental rug or carpet, which is special to the family and sort of, in a way, represents them and tells their life story. So the film is the life story of a carpet. And it tells the story of this woman who runs away from her tribe to be with her lover. And it's told in flashback, and you start to realise that the two lovers in the story are the two older people who own the gabay. So it's a folkloric film. It is purely visually one of the most beautiful films ever made. It is lick the screen gorgeous, from the very first shot where the gabay, the rug, floats down a river. Its colours dappled under the water. From that moment on, it's just sheerly beautiful. It uses all the techniques of most Iranian films, like repetition of shots, an almost poetic sort of, rhythm to it. And it's just beautiful. The use of colour is stunning. It's one of the great, Makhmalbaf is one of the great underestimated colourists in cinema. It's a folkloric film. It's symbolic. It doesn't touch ground with reality very much, though the reality of these nomadic tribes is shown in the way that, the hardship of the journeys that you have to undertake and everything. But it's more a sort of symbolic film. It's absolutely gorgeous. I don't know how anyone could not like it, really. Incidentally, the two films it's paired with, the second one, The Silence, is also beautiful. Beautiful use of sound and music. It's about a deaf boy who a blind boy, who tunes musical instruments. And the vast majority of the film is a very clever, I think, attempt to convey the world from a different set of senses. From a sense point of view of someone where vision is not their primary sense, sound and touch and feel is their primary sense. How do you represent that on a film? And I think Makhmalbaf is very successful in how he tries to convey that until the end, which goes a bit sentimental and wanky and crowd-pleasing. It's a very bad ending. But for about the first two-thirds of the movie is well worth watching. The third movie, The Gardener, don't bother. It's just not worth it. It's crap. Okay, the other one that I saw, a film that I resaw, is The Hypothesis of the Stolen Painting. Isn't that one of the best titles for a movie you've ever heard? The Hypothesis of the Stolen Painting. Now, this is a special cult object. It was made in the 1970s by a director called Raul Ruiz, who is a sort of legend in his own lifetime. He's a cult within a cult. He was a Chilean filmmaker who went into exile in Paris. That's where he worked most of his life. And he is, I think, by far and away, the most prolific filmmaker ever. He just churned out movies, all kinds of movies, everywhere. He made films in America, France, Chile, everywhere. And all types of different movies. And he made crazy movies. Even people, as scholars of Ruiz, have struggled to find all his movies and watch all of them. That's how prolific he was. This is one of his most well-known, and I absolutely love this movie. It's only about an hour long, and it's very odd, right? So what happens is, it starts out with a shot that seems to be at dawn in a Paris street, and there seems to be some kind of barrier in the street with a tree. You think, it's a bit odd. And you go into the house, and the house is the home of an art collector. And this art collector is trying to solve a puzzle. Way back in the 1900s, this lesser-known painter painted a series of paintings that eventually the government and the establishment tried to ban. And the idea was that they showed something, a secret or a secret society, which the government and the establishment didn't want to be known about. And this guy, this collector, is trying to work it out. He's trying to piece together the puzzle from the imagery of the paintings. The only problem is a painting is missing. It was stolen. So what he does is, the movie is a sort of detective puzzle, an art detective puzzle, trying to work out what the secret is of these paintings. And what he does is he recreates the paintings as tableaux vivants in this house. So there's a scene of, Diana with her stags, and the hounds, and is it Actaeon is watching from the bushes. So he recreates it in the garden, and he has a man standing there, and there's a woman standing with her quiver of arrows and everything. And then he walks through the painting, and the camera walks through the painting to try to see what we're supposed to be looking at in the painting. So it's a game. It's both a detective game of interpreting a work of art, but it's also a game of space and light and mirrors. The whole thing is a jeu d'esprit. It's a bit of fun. It's a bit of intellectual games playing. I find it an absolutely entrancing movie. I love it to pieces. It's got a really unique atmosphere. I love the ending where he kind of abandons his quest and all the different actors from all the different paintings start merging together. And you almost feel, am I starting to see the reality of what the paintings were trying to show? Who's talking to whom? Where are they standing? What's their relationship to each other? It's a bit of fun. If you've got that kind of mindset, likes that kind of thing, likes the idea of searching for secrets in occult books or looking for symbolism in paintings, you'll absolutely love it. I think it's a gem. Next up, have you come across Seth Holt? Now, Seth Holt is one of these names, right? British cinema. There's all these directors who, they could have been geniuses. They could have been great, but somehow their career didn't quite take off. Recently there's been a lot of discussion of that list that Martin Scorsese drew up with Edgar Wright of all the sort of little-known British movies that are absolutely brilliant. And Scorsese is a huge fan of Seth Holt. He was a sort of journeyman director who worked in British cinema through the late 50s and early 60s, making genre movies, And some people, like Scorsese, rate him very highly. I checked out Seth Holt. I checked out The Nanny with Bette Davis. I checked out a film called Taste of Fear, which I think is a Hammer film. It's okay. I thought, this is a bit exaggerated. But recently, I caught up with Station 6 Sahara. Now, this is a different thing altogether. I have a real love of movies where you have a group of disparate people with disparate characters trapped together in some isolated place. I love that kind of thing. And I especially like it if they're single sex. So like the nuns in Black Narcissus, or as we have here, a group of men who are a mix of British and German men who are trapped in this oil refinery, which is way out in the desert in Africa, right? And the simmering tensions between them. And into these simmering tensions comes very improbably and deliberately improbably, there's this huge Cadillac car crashes into the compound, and it contains Carol Baker, who was a bit of a sex bomb at the time. And she starts to inflame tensions between the men. What I find really interesting about this film, though, is the subplot. Now, the subplot, right, is there's a very English sort of, soldier figure played by Denholm Elliott, who's very repressed and priggish. And there's a Scotsman who's very funny. He's kind of the comic relief character, and he doesn't care about, being nice or being polite or whatever. Played brilliantly by Ian Bannon. And they have a tension between them. They don't like each other. They're always annoying each other. And Ian Bannon one night says to Denholm Elliott's character, look, you get loads of letters from people. I never get a letter. Can I buy one of your letters? I get to pick it. You don't get to choose it. I get to choose it. And I'll buy this letter. And so Denholm Elliott goes along with it because he wants the money. And then he spends the rest of the film worried about what the letter is and what Ian Bannon's reading about him. And that prickly little comic subplot is actually, to me, the spine of the movie. Elliott and Ian Bannon are quite brilliant. Ian Bannon is so funny in the part. Ian Bannon is one of those actors where they know how to go a little bit over the top without ruining the truth of the situation. And he does it quite brilliantly here. And I find that tension between them more interesting than the tension brought in by Carol Baker, actually. But the movie, this sense of repression, this sense of repressed, tense emotions is brilliantly sustained. It does the typical British movie thing at the end of wrapping it all nicely as if it all didn't already matter, which is a bit of a shame. But up until that point, it's a really brilliant piece of sustained, tense direction. I recommend it. Going back now to the 1930s and the mainstream cinema of another country which doesn't get much looked at, and that is the mainstream cinema of France. In Britain and America, we talk about the art house cinema of France a lot, but not much its mainstream cinema. Now, last year at the Il Cinema Ritrovato Festival in Bologna, they did a season on Anatole Litvak. Litvak was an interesting director who worked in many different countries, including in Hollywood. He was well regarded in the industry, but didn't sort of get known very much publicly. They did a whole season of his films, very interesting. Most people thought the best film was a film that I didn't get to see. I finally got around to it this year. It's a French film called Leipage, or The Crew. And what it is, in the 30s, particularly in France, but all over Europe, the great heroes of the time were pilots. Aces, World War I aces, right? And that's what this film is about, right? It's about a group of French pilots during the First World War, right? And it's about the relationship between the guy who flies the plane and the gunner or the observer, right? And it's like a brotherly bond, like a marriage, right? And what's interesting is this young guy comes into the unit and he discovers that there's a bloke in the unit who no one else likes. They seem to have some kind of weird personal repulsion from him. It's very sad, actually. The actor is played very well by Marcel Varnel. And he decides, well, I like him. He's all right. So they come together and they're buddies. And they're lords of the sky. And then it just happens that the young girl who the young man has fallen in love with just happens to be his buddy's wife. That happens all the time, doesn't it? So yes, it's a melodrama and it's very over the top and far-fetched. And it breaks apart the two men. I'm not here to say that this is a masterpiece, but what I think is interesting about it is it's interesting to go back and watch a mainstream film from France, not an art film, a film that could be made in Hollywood or could be made in Britain. It's beautifully acted, it's beautifully paced, the story is well told, it's involving. We've forgotten these films. And these films were important. They built the popular industry in France, And I think sometimes it's good to go back and watch these films and remind us that this is what cinema was built on. Just quality in entertaining, intelligent storytelling like this. So try it out. L'Equipage, The Crew. Next up, let's talk about Ginsa Tales. Now, you might find there's quite a lot of Japanese films with Ginza in the title. It's a district, the district of Tokyo, I believe, a sort of bar, hostess, red light district, okay? This is by a director called Kawashima, a director I've mentioned many times on this channel and a director I'm very fond of. He is, according to many Japanese critics, including myself, film critics, he's the sort of person who bridges the gap between the classic cinema of Ozu and Mizoguchi and the modern cinema of the 60s new wave. And this is an early film of his, but you really see it here. You really see it because, in some ways, what we're treating here is a kind of classic Mizoguchi melodrama of a woman searching for her lost love. In this case, it's a very unusual plot line, actually. It's a woman who was painted as a young girl by this man who she conceived a love for, and she's trying to find him again. And she's assisted by this guy who thinks he knows who the painter is, he thinks the painter might be his brother, and is also slowly falling in love with the woman. So there's a sort of Mizoguchi melodrama aspect to this. But it's the way that Kawashima films it, the reality, the sort of air of violence on the streets of Ginza, particularly when the protagonist visits a sort of opium den. Extraordinary sequence. At the end, we find out that this man that they're looking for is actually become the Mr. Big, the sort of mob boss of the area. So it's a brilliant deconstruction almost through a melodrama story of where Japan has come from the war. and what modernisation and capitalism has turned Japan into. It's a terrific movie, actually, not very well known, but you can find it on rarefilms.com, and I strongly advise you try it out. Another film that I caught up with recently, and I've been tracking this one down for years, it seems. It's called in Italian La Prima Notte di Quiete. I don't know if I've pronounced that correctly, the first night of calm. It's in English, it's called this rather silly name, Indian Summer. I don't know why it's called that, really. There is a brief mention of Indian Summer in the film, but it doesn't really sum up the film at all well. Anyway, it's an Italian film that was made in the 70s. And it's, to all intents and purposes, a kind of classic, 70s European art house movie. Sort of moody, it's set in Rimini, this beachside town, but it's not set in the summer, it's set in the winter. It's very moody and cold and foggy and atmospheric. And it's a classic piece of European art house storyline. So it stars Alain Delon, who is quite brilliant in it. You know how Alain Delon's looks, they're quite glacial and brittle and very enigmatic. And he uses that enigmatic quality to its best effect in this film. Part of the film is trying to get into the mind of the main character. And that's one of the most interesting aspects of it. Anyway, he turns up as this kind of supply teacher in this town. And at first you think it's going to be some kind of Italian Dead Poet Society, because it's how he relates in a kind of crazy cool way to his students. He just goes out and gets the papers and lets them riot in the classroom. Anyway, after a while, he develops an interest in one of the girls in the class. She's about 19, 20. Anyway, and he takes a liking to her and he starts courting her. She is very beautiful, to be fair. Anyway, but it turns out that she's going out with the local Mr. Big, who drives a great big fancy sports car. He sort of comically drives an old-fashioned pre-war sort of, one of those big clunking hulks of cars. So it's, symbolism. Yeah, symbolism. Right? And so he finds himself in sort of rivalry with this guy, who is a sort of cheap local bigwig who runs a kind of prostitution gambling business, which he's inveigling this schoolgirl into. One of the things that's interesting about this movie is it starts off very enigmatically, and you think, where is it going? And it gets more and more conventional. So it becomes more and more of a conventional melodrama, and, fight over this girl's soul, basically. And similarly, Alain Delon's character starts out very enigmatic, and then he becomes more and more normal as the film goes on. You could say that's a criticism, but after watching the film, I can't get it out of my head. And all of the film, rather like Antonioni, not quite as good as Antonioni, but in a similar kind of way, it's all about atmosphere. It's all about the whole atmosphere and the way the characters are presented is the film. It is the intellectual thrust of the film. The actual storyline is not the point. It's how it shows that storyline. And I found it a very absorbing and strange film. And I want to see more by the director, Zolini, his name is. Kind of forgotten figure, but he's very interesting, and I'd like to see more of his films. Now, I'm going to talk about a film now that I don't think is a very good film. But I must admit, of the films I've seen in recent times, it was one of the films that gave me the most fun. And this is a film I've been chasing down for ages. It's an early 90s American film with a big star in it, Mimi Rogers, who was, of course, Tom Cruise's first wife. Now, Mimi Rogers in this film is a film called The Rapture, right? And the critic Robin Wood said in this film that Mimi Rogers gave one of the greatest performances in the history of American cinema. That's a big claim, right? I think partly he gave this because Mimi Rogers, I don't know why Tom Cruise left her, she's so attractive. She has an extraordinary charisma on screen. And what I like about her is she's a beauty, she's quite sexy, but she's a very natural, normal beauty. She's not a sort of, like Charlize Theron, a sort of unreal clone figure, or a beach babe like Pamela Anderson. She's just a normal woman. And what happens in this film, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but she starts off and she's a bit of a gal. She works in a telephone switchboard, and she's bored. So to amuse herself, she goes out at night and has sex and orgies and all sorts of stuff. But she's slowly getting spiritually bored. She wants to change her life. And she finds out about this Christian sect. And she joins it and she's converted, and she converts her boyfriend, played by our friend from the X-Files, David Duchovny, in an early role. And so they become Christian converts, and they believe that the apocalypse is coming and that God is coming for Judgment Day, right? David Duchovny gets killed in an incident at work. And the Mimi Rogers character believes, she believes that she has to go up to heaven with her daughter to be with him, right? And it's a crisis of faith. I don't want to spoil the movie too much, but it's a movie that's really all about its ending and the choice that she makes at the end. And it's a very brave, some might say foolish or foolhardy American film that tries to take on the subject of religion and religious faith seriously in a Hollywood movie with a Hollywood star. It doesn't really work. It doesn't work. The ending is all over the place. It really is. But you know what? I kind of think, well, good on you for trying. And it's worth watching just for Mimi Rogers, because she is incredible in it. She really is. It's a really brave performance. I don't think it's one of the best performances in cinema like Robin Wood. I think he was a bit taken with her, you know what I mean? But it is a very interesting performance. It's very different from the kind of performances you usually get in Hollywood films, particularly in that era. And that's kind of one of the reasons I enjoyed watching it. But finally this time around, and I'm even more embarrassed by this choice, what is the film experience I've most enjoyed in the last few months? I have to make a confession to you, right? Well, it is a TV series that I've been trying to track down for many years. It was made in 2019 by Nicholas Winding Refn, and it's called Too Old to Die Young, a 10-part series, which he thought of as one film, right? Now, I'm slightly embarrassed to pick this film because it is one of the most horrible, repulsive and adolescent loads of old cobblers you've ever seen in your life. I mean, it's just an excuse for Nicholas Winding Refn to put as much horribleness in an American TV series as he can think of. So there's killing, rape, gang rape, mutilation, whipping. Let me think. There's a guy who wants to shag his mother. There's a guy who has a bullwhip shoved up his rectum. What else happens? You know, it's that kind of movie. Don't watch it with your grandma. She won't enjoy it. And the storyline puts the most amount of scumbags in one television series as has ever been amassed. So our hero is a cop who spits everywhere. He spits everywhere, and he's a bent cop. So in the first very difficult scene to watch of the film, he and his partner basically exploit some poor woman driving at home at night, try to exploit sort of sex and money out of her and make her feel really uncomfortable and make the audience feel uncomfortable. And he is now going to be our hero throughout the movie. So that's what happens. Then some guy comes and kills his partner and drives off into the distance. And so a sort of revenge scenario is set between these two people. And you then find out that this cop who spits and is bent picked up a 16-year-old girl, which is underage in America, a schoolgirl off the side of the road, when she'd just seen her mother die, and seduced her and is having sex with her. And she has a father who likes this and spends the entire movie, it's played by one of the Baldwins, and he's very funny in this, and he spends the entire movie with a cold, so every line of dialogue he has, he goes, which for some reason amuses me. And so the storyline is split between this really horrible American cop, who is the representation of everything ugly and violent in modern America, and the guy who shot his partner, who we find out is a member of a Mexican cartel, and his mother, who he secretly fancies, of course, was the head of the cartel in Los Angeles. So he goes back to Mexico to be raised up the cartel ranks. And he becomes involved, and then he becomes the second protagonist. So there's an American story and a Mexican story. He co-wrote this with a guy called Ed Brubaker. And you can tell that Refn is much more interested in the Mexican story than he is in the American story. That Brubaker is more in control of the American story, and Refn is more in control of the Mexican story. And the reason is that Refn is an unusual modern filmmaker. He purports this to be a film about modern America, but the odd thing about Refn is that he's a very old-fashioned filmmaker. He's really like a sort of bard from the days of Beowulf, from the days of the Icelandic sagas. He thinks in those kind of medieval terms of kings and queens and dynasties and great battles and great rivalries. So when he goes to Mexico, this sort of old world of dynasties and men who behave like kings and have courtiers, the stylistics of the film really come to the fore, and he's really enjoying it. With the American side of it, he starts playing around, and it becomes kind of like a sub-Tarantino-esque sort of playfulness, which is not as interesting. The richness of this sort of pageant, of this kind of almost old-fashioned, monarchical world in Mexico, really fires his enthusiasm. And that's what I really loved about this film, if I'm completely honest with you. It's just its style. I am a style junkie, right? I admit that there are some filmmakers who can just seduce me with their style, and I love Refn's style. He makes everything at a deliberately glacial pace. Often he has his camera just travelling like a security camera, back and forth very slowly, panning across these very lurid neon-lit scenes. He's colourblind, Nicholas Winding Refn, so he likes big primary colours. And I love the sort of 80s neon saturation of the screen and the way he shoots scenes and the way the camera travels through scenes, almost in semi-twilight darkness. And it's all backgrounded by the fantastic synth score of Cliff Martinez, which gives it a kind of David Lynchian feel. It's almost like if you crossed David Lynch with Tarantino, with a European art house director, you get close to the styling of this movie. It's a very horrible movie. In its last 2 episodes, Brubaker is dropped for another screenwriter, and Refn unwisely tries to turn it into a statement on America with a terrible pastiche of Zabriskie Point, which is really embarrassing and ruins one of the best characters in the whole story. My advice, if you watch this film, just watch the first 8 episodes. Don't bother with episodes 9 and 10. They're crap. They ruin it. But if you watch the first 8 episodes, it's relentlessly horrible, it's relentlessly ugly, and stylistically, it's kind of addictive. It's kind of compelling. Too Old to Die Young. I'm almost sorry I'm recommending it, but I felt I had to. Thanks very much.